Thank you so much, Marianne. Yes. So we. Oh, do you want to be that side? Thank you, Mike. Yes, I'm going to run you through this study that we did, a large-scale survey of general public in the UK. The first one we could find that really looked at public perceptions of collapsing attention, which I think is a really important part of this. And I'm going to try and run you through just 4 points in the time I've got available. So the first one is quite an obvious. First couple are actually quite obvious, is that we are feeling the pressure on our attention. So there's a strong recognition among the public that we're living through something that could be called an attention war. So we ask people whether they agree or disagree that we're living through a time where there's non-stop competition for our attention from TV, news, social media platforms, other information outlets. And you get quite a lot of people agreeing with that. The vast majority of people agreeing with that, up to 3/4 of the public, and quite a lot strongly agreeing with that. And there is quite a strong age gradient to this, where it's older people who feel that more. And I've just recently published a book on generational differences, and that's no surprise for me, because we are socialized into different sorts of environments, and what's normal for us depends on what we grew up with. And Douglas Adams, the great Douglas Adams, put this really well in his 3 rules, which I refer back to quite a lot, that anything that is in the world when you're born is normal and ordinary and just a natural part of the way the world works. Anything that's invented between when you're 15 and 35 is new and exciting and revolutionary, and you can probably get a job in it, and I think that applies to lots of people here. But anything invented after you're 35 is against the natural order of things, and that's something, as a 50-year-old, that's something that I feel very deeply right now with our changing technology. But the second point, the big qualification on this, is that we always feel the pressure. And this relates to some of Marianne's points in the introduction, as this is not brand new to human feeling. We always tend to think things are going downhill. I wrote another book on people's misperceptions of social reality, and this declinism bias, so this sense that everything is in decline, is a very strong human trait, where we often have too rosy a view of the past. And we actually looked for, as part of this, we tried to look at long-term surveys, try to unearth surveys that have looked at attention in the past and whether people actually think differently now about attention to back then. And it was interesting because there wasn't that many questions. There was very few questions about attention as such. This is a new area, but there is lots of questions about things like just too much pressure on our time that have been asked over the long term, relatively long term. There just aren't enough hours in the day to do all that I want to do. And it is true that we have got a strong sense of pressure on our time now. Over half of people, 55% of people in 2021 think that's the case. But when you look back to 1997, so nearly a quarter of a century ago, it was actually 62% of people thought there was too much pressure on our time now. So this is not a new feeling. We always feel like we're being rushed more things to do, but that is a kind of constant of history. But the third point I want to make, the main point in many ways, is that the book that relates to the book on myths and misperceptions, is that myths and misperceptions abound on attention. And the first one is that we don't really have, a very personal one, we don't really have a full view of just how distracted we are by technology. We asked the question of people, how many times do you check your phone per day? And this, if we didn't have these headphones on, I'd be asking people to shout out guesses for this, but I'm going to try it anyway. I wonder if you can. I'm going to take mine off. Let's see if I can hear anyone shout out what you think the reality is for how many times, on average, people check their phone per day. I'm a little bit nervy asking this audience, because you're going to do it with your hands. That's really good. Is that 12? 12 times a day. 3 times a day. 300 times a day. We got 3. This is very inventive. This you're still going. You're just flashing your hands at me. I can't count that many. So we got somewhere between 12 and 300. You have no idea as an audience, do you? You're all over the place. 70, 700 times a day. This is unusual, audience. 54, 540. Yeah. So, 341. Okay. 341. This is amazing. You're very inventive in your sign language. That's very, very good. The reality actually was quite hard to find out, because obviously you can't ask people, but there are passive data sources of different sorts. There was a couple, one from Apple, one from Verto Analytics, which you may have heard of. And it was actually quite a range in terms of the reality. Somewhere between 50 and 80 was what people got through these types of measurements. Some of those are quite old. measurements, so it could have gone up. But the key point from the perceptions, the public perceptions point of view, anyone guess what the public thought the reality was? This is not the actual reality. A lot lower. Yeah, I'll go with that. It was a lot lower. So 25 times was the average guess, the mean estimate across the public as a whole. So we haven't got that sense that we're picking it up, interacting with it as much as we actually are, which you can understand. It's done. A lot of it is done unconsciously. So we're going to have to deal with this fella because it's come up a couple of times in the discussion. So in the Misperceptions book, I talk about why we're wrong about social realities is a mix of how we think and what we're told. And it's really important to say that it's both of those things. It's the biases and heuristics that we have in ourselves, but it's also how we're actively misled. And we're also actively misled on this type of thing. And it is the goldfish zombie myth, I call it, not zombie goldfish, but a zombie myth about goldfish that just won't die across different things. And where it actually came from, and you may all know this, but so I'll go through it, but you may have come across this, but where it actually came from, as far as we can tell, is a Microsoft Canada report from around 2015, that sort of time, where they said that the average attention span for humans was 12 seconds in 2000, then it dropped to 8 seconds by 2013, and that is shorter than a goldfish, which has an attention span of 9 seconds, according to this report. But there's absolutely no data in that report that supports this. But it didn't stop it getting absolutely masses of coverage in the US, National Post, in Time magazine, US and Canada, in New York Times, came over to UK in the Telegraph, and then it actually became a bit of a trope in discussions, political discussions, people talking about the goldfish age as a thing, all based on this report that has no data behind it. And it was being checked lots and lots of times by different sorts of people. BBC4's More or Less, which is always a good program for these types of things, concluded there's no evidence that human attention spans are shrinking, and that the second part being that goldfish don't have particularly short memories in any case, or they don't have memory problems at all. But the majority of the public still think it might be true. So we ask people, are the following true or false? The average attention span among adults is only 8 seconds, and the majority of people, half of people, actually think it's definitely or maybe true, with 1 in 5 thinking it is definitely true, and only 10% thinking it's definitely false. And this is that classic of illusory truth bias. When you just see something lots of times, you're more likely to believe a lie on the second or third time that you see it. And we've just seen this socialized into our consciousness, and it's not true. It is not a true fact. And this is continuing, and there's a book that have got a lot of attention lately called Stolen Focus by Johan Hari, which I'm sure lots of you have read. And Johan says that our ability to pay attention and focus is in free fall. That's one of the key tenets of the book. But then slightly later, Johan goes back to, on page 176 of Stolen Focus, Johan actually goes back and says, we don't have any long-term studies tracking change in people's ability to focus over time. So there isn't actually evidence. I like the book. Lots of good points in there, including about the systemic nature of the problem, that this is not an individual's problem. Lots and lots of good things. But that fundamental point about whether attention spans are actually collapsing is not based on any real evidence. Although, again, huge coverage of it. All sorts of different ways. We're talking about a 65-second attention span now. That's what we've settled on, is we've got a 65-second attention span. None of it really based on fact. But again, we believe the coverage. And we believe at a personal level. In some ways, we ask people whether their attention span is shorter than it used to be. This is more not trying to measure the actual level, but whether it's declining, that sense of decline. And we do think our own, the majority of us again, half of us again, do think it's declining. Very few disagree with that. But we're also much more likely to think about it, think it's true for other people, and particularly young people. I believe young people today have short attention spans. In young people in the past, you've got 2/3 of people agreeing with that. And that is, again, I've written another book on generational differences between people, and that is another key trope that we have. Thinking that today's young are uniquely wrong or weird is a constant of history, that they have got it wrong. That goes back to Socrates worrying about writing and worrying about the nature and character of young people. Is going downhill in particular. And again, none of it based on any evidence. But the final point I want to make relates to one of the themes I think that's come through from all of the talks is about diversity among different people. It depends on where you are. And a lot of the things I've been showing you here are just aggregates. It's just the average view across the public. And I think one of the key things from a Centre for Attention Studies point of view is to understand that there is no one public opinion on attention and no one public type of interaction with things that relate to attention. So we did a segmentation of the public based on 5 different aspects: whether people feel overloaded with information, feel they have attention spans problems, whether they see engagement with social media as a good thing, concerned about what technology is doing to how we think, whether it's affecting our ability to think deeply, and whether they see access to online information as a positive. So trying to take a broader view of how we understand the information environment and its effects on us. And the key point from that is there is no one group. In fact, when we look at the statistical analysis, there's 4 quite distinct groups in the population with very different positions on this. And the one thing, I do an awful lot of opinion polling on different sorts of things, and one thing you've always got to bear in mind that there's about 1 in 5 people who just don't care about anything. Whatever the topic is you're asking about, doesn't matter if it's politics or all those things, they're completely disengaged but also untroubled by this. They have other things going on in their lives and they're not really bothered. So there's 1 in 5, 17% of people who are just disengaged and untroubled by all this attention or what the information environment is doing to us. And then we have 2 other groups, or about 20%, each who are pretty negative about this, but they're quite distinct in their own ways. So you've got overloaded skeptics who do feel that there's too much information, but they're not really particularly engaged themselves. So they don't like it, but it's not really affecting them. They've got then the second part of that group is probably a lot of the people in this room. This is how I feel in some ways. You've got the kind of stress tech addicts. You actually are into it, you use it a lot, you get a lot out of it in different sorts of ways, but you feel overloaded by it, and that is another group too. But then finally, there is this 4th group who are positive multi-screeners, we've called them. It could be multi-source information, people who are highly engaged users, keen information searchers, relaxed in terms of managing their information, some concerns about shortening attention spans, but a lot of that is based on these false rumours about what is happening to our attention spans, but not much concern about others, and see lots of the positives. So you've got a 4 in 10 who are actually pretty into this, not that concerned, actually see the benefits of it. 4 in 10 who are pretty stressed about it, but in different sorts of ways and different sorts of engagement, and then 1 in 5 who just don't care and are completely disengaged. So that's the final point for me. I just wanted to, that is really important, and why we've got a Centre for Attention Studies and why we're unpicking this more generally. You can make sweeping generalizations about our relationship with information, how that's affecting our attention, but the real work is understanding this diversity and what we do in different sorts of situations. Thank you.